movie industry is built around blockbuster advertising. And a lot of that advertising had its source right here in the metro. The big player was a company called FEPCO.
They actually produce advertising for all 50 states and into Canada, so they had become an international player. So they would provide you with the press kit, and the press kit was kind of like the full menu of opportunities for you to purchase advertising options. So within that, there would be various sizes of advertising blocks that FEPCO could produce for you. For example, at the top of the run of, say, like Star Wars, maybe you want to purchase a bigger block at a half page because you want to throw a lot of money into newspaper advertising for the debut. And then there would be subsequent smaller sizes of blocks as the run went on through a year. And films would stay in theaters much longer than they do now. You could order lobby cards and all kinds of different sizes of posters. There was sample language to send to radio personalities to promote the film, depending on the audience you're looking to attract. Within each press kit, there's different campaigns that are targeting a specific sector of a moviegoer. So maybe one ad would focus on the romance. One might focus on action, and one might be more of a family-friendly advertising. So they gave you different options based on what you thought your customer would be interested in. The press kit also included some like guerrilla marketing tactics that were produced by the brilliant minds in the studio PR departments. And many of them just are kind of ridiculous in our 2022 world, but they gave you all the tools you needed to generate the buzz. Actually, I can read you one. So one of my favorite press kits is from a film called Pyro from 1963. Look at this man and beware. There's nothing human about him except his desires. So he's Pyro, the thing without a face. And then if you flip through the press kit, you get your different campaigns with your beautiful woman. You get your scary pyromaniac guy attacking the woman. There's all kinds of angles here. But in the back, we have some content called Selling Slants, and this is where it gets really goofy. So there's 13 options, and 2 of my favorite. Number 1, utilize a street ballyhoo consisting of a pretty girl garbed in tight-fitting capris and a form-fitting sweater armed with a Polaroid camera. She takes pictures of passers-by and hands them a card with a copy. You're invited to view an act of pyromania. And then number 10, stage a beauty contest in your town with only flaming pyro redheads with blazing red hair as the contestants. They're allowed to use dye if they care to. Winner to head up a fire prevention drive and earn the title as Miss Pyro. And the local merchants supply gifts.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about? Who started this?
Of course. And this is my favorite part of the story because it brings Miss Esther Green into our lives, who's quite a dynamic lady. She was born in Council Bluffs in 1903. And when she was 17 years old, she married Walter Green. And together, Walter and Esther formed FEPCO at the age of 21 in the year 1924, right when things were really picking up with the film industry. And it started really small with one press, and Walter would manage the day-to-day operations of FEPCO, while Esther worked for the Metropolitan Utilities District as a clerk to pay for groceries and rent. She scrimped and saved her pennies and eventually was able to buy a second press for FEPCO 4 years later. They seemed to identify the opportunity very early in the game, so they were able to establish themselves kind of as the place to get your film advertising pieces. So Esther Boyer, she's the daughter of Charles Boyer, who owned Boyer Coal, which was based here in Council Bluffs. She's a champion. So this is my favorite quote about her. She's a force in an all-masculine world and as feminine as a lace parasol. Walter passed away in 1950. Esther outlived him by about 40 years. She really took FEPCO to the national prominence and even international prominence in the 60s and 70s at the height of the business. So, girl power.
Yeah, really. So whatever happened to FEPCO then? Are they still around?
FEPCO is no longer around. They shuttered their doors in 1980, I believe, and then Esther passed away just a year after that. So FEPCO hit a rough patch in the 70s, as the entire movie industry seemed to. There's two major factors here. One was the audience was getting their information in different ways, so a lot more television advertising versus newspapers and radio. And then eventually the technology at newspapers was growing into offset lithoprinting, which only required photo-ready art. So that means these press kits, all you had to do was cut out the sample ad and mail it into the newspaper. You no longer needed the plates and the flongs, so FEPCO was becoming a little irrelevant during the 70s. So, FEPCO had what was that, like 50-year run at the top of the game, and she died a Hollywood icon and a very wealthy woman. Modern Sound was the other major player in Omaha. They were friendly with FEPCO, and they were kind of parallel businesses. They weren't competitors. Modern Sound had a different customer base than FEPCO. FEPCO handled the theatrical releases, and Modern Sound handled non-theatrical releases. So that means a lot of educational films or re-releases of very old films from the 20s on. And then their customer was not a ticket payer at a theater. It would be a church or a government entity, a school, or much of their business came from prisons. So when you worked with Modern Sound, you could rent the actual film reel, and you could also rent the projection equipment, the screens, and then have a tech even come help you set everything up to run it. Keith and Margaret Smith founded Modern Sound Studios in 1939, and they enjoyed much of the same success that FEPCO did, with the peak years being in the 60s and 70s. In the 80s, their daughter, Sandra Smith, kind of took over operations. She had the challenge of navigating the changing audience and technology, but, being schools and prisons, the changes seemed to happen a little slower for the non-theatrical release market. People still needed to screen films in classrooms, and they still had the equipment and reel rental business. 2014, they shuttered their doors. They just couldn't compete in the digital age. You no longer needed the big bulky projector. You didn't need the big film reel. You could share a film on a memory stick or email it, or, pull up Netflix near the end there. And, they just became a little obsolete in the digital age. But the story with our film advertising collection is that when FEPCO shuttered its doors in the early 80s, Sandra Smith saw potential in acquiring the collection with the popularity of re-releases onto new formats like VHS and Beta. She was also known to have a bit of a preservationist spirit. We have a beautiful collection of this part of advertising history because she didn't want to destroy it.
Okay, we got some interesting things here now, like this little block I'm looking at. Tell me, how does this work?
So that is a printing block. The top face on that is a sheet of magnesium, and the image is burned into the metal through a process called photo relief that uses high impact UV lights and then an acid wash to clear away the negative space. And then it leaves you that crisp, clear image, which could be mounted into a printing press and reproduced thousands and thousands of times. This is a negative for a film called The Trail of the Royal Mounted. And this negative would be used to, in the light exposure process, onto the metal. Remove this, wash the metal with the acid, and then the photo relief. And there's a really great documentary that I just want to send people to. It was made in 1950.
Well, I think it'd be a great time to take a look at that.
He has the negative mounted on a piece of glass. And now, he puts it over a metal plate. This plate is covered with a chemical. The whole works goes under a powerful arc lamp. The plate goes into a developing bath in this tank. When it comes out of the bath, the picture is printed on the plate. The engraver dries it off and puts it into a tank, where it is sprayed with a strong acid. When it comes out, the tones and lines of the picture are etched onto the plate, and it's ready to print. In the composing room, this man is setting the type. Each key releases a tiny mold inside the machine. These drop down here in a line. Then hot metal is poured into the mold, and out comes the line of the story. This printer is setting larger type for the headline. He takes the molds for the type to a casting machine. Then out comes the line of the type. Here's the whole headline. Now they're making up the page and puts the picture into place. And the page is done. He locks up the form and sends it on to the stereotyping department. Here, the mat roller takes over. Then it all goes under a heavy roller. And here's the mat for the page. Every line and letter of the page is pressed into it. They pop it into a dryer and bake it for a while. And then it's ready for the casting machine. The mat comes off, and here it is, cast on a metal plate. The plate goes along to a rack where it is trimmed to the right width. Then he shaves the edges to make them smooth. It's ready to print, and off it goes, headed for the press room.
And you can see this one has a lot of different films on one sheet. So there's Here Comes the Fuzz, Walt Disney's Son of Flubber, Now You See Him, Now You Don't. And this is a page that advertised films at the 84th and Center Drive-In Theater. And then on the back, you can see the stereotyper mounted it with some reinforcements so that it was fully impacted on the press.
And what are the holes in it?
Entering specific times, that would have been metal typesetting inserted into the negative space. When Modern Sound shuttered its doors, Larry started acquiring pieces of the collection. The bulk of the collection came from Modern Sound Pictures, whom had acquired it from FEPCO. And in addition to the blocks, flongs, the reels, the projection equipment, we have a lot of vintage letter presses and wood block fonts and types.
Early on in my life, when I was 8 years old, I was asked to pick dandelions in my neighbor's yard, and he paid me a quarter of 1 cent for each dandelion I picked. We picked enough where I ended up with $3 worth of cash from it, and I immediately went down to the hobby center and bought a hand print set where you print with the ink and letter by letter by letter. And for some reason, I just liked that. So in my latter years, I started collecting old-fashioned printing sets. And then that led from one thing to the next. And I've always liked movies. So the movies became part of kind of the collection that I went after. And I put a lot of things up that people like to see from historical standpoint and from a movie standpoint and everything else associated with it. And then allow people to come in and play with the press and everything else. And it will eventually grow and get bigger and become somewhat of a place people want to come to.
I would invite our Council Bluffs community to come check us out. We're ramping up to have a more public-facing presence in town. If you're looking to have some custom creation made or attend an interesting event, just keep us in mind.
History is never truly lost until it's forgotten. And preserving that history is our mission. The Historical Society of Pottawatomie County in Council Bluffs, Iowa.